This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Akamai Technologies and Carasoft. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, smoothing the path into the federal government, the identity issue making cyber life easier for your team, and Gen AI gets a boost in the Army. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. The Office of Personnel Management and the Office of Management and Budget are aiming new guidance at improving the federal hiring experience. The changes the agencies are authorizing could improve that experience for new employees and agencies that hire them. Loren DeJonge Schulman is Associate Director for Performance and Personnel Management at OMB. Loren, welcome. It's great to see you again. Thank you for joining me. What are you getting at here? What is the outcome that you're aiming for at this memo that you and OPM have released?
We too often just accept that federal hiring is going to be hard. It's going to take a while because, for good reason, we want the best qualified talent in the federal government. It doesn't have to be that way. For folks who are applying to the federal government, for hiring managers who are bringing in those incredible personnel, for HR leaders, and for the senior leaders at agencies, it can be an easier process. We have incredible tools that take advantage of the scale of government hiring, and we can do it in a way that makes the entire process have better outcomes for us all, including the American people. When you have a better hiring experience for all of those parts of this ecosystem, you end up with better people in government, you end up better service delivery for the American people, and you have with people who are committed to the mission and want to be here for the long time.
There are three main constituents, I guess, that this guidance is aimed at. The people who are the potential hires, we'll talk about them in a moment.
Yep.
You also have very specific asks and deliverables and goals for the HR professionals in government and the hiring managers in government who are affected by this. What do you aim for each one of those groups of people?
So one important context point here is the work that we've been doing in the Biden administration on hiring has been going on for years now. There's been incredible tools launched, great policies, there are a lot of new initiatives. My colleague over at OPM, the acting director, Robert Shriver, he calls this a culmination. So he's right, but I call this a springboard. We wanted to make sure that all federal hiring managers and HR specialists knew here's the full suite of tools. And it's not just that these are possible, because many of them are pilots, is that these are now policy. We expect you to have a plan for how you want to implement, and we expect you to bring them into your practice. And yes, I did just do alliteration because it's the best way to remember. But with all of those, we wanted to make sure we weren't just putting out words and saying like, okay guys, go enjoy. Wanted to make sure that every element of this was a new way for them to take advantage of the scale of government hiring, to take advantage of the fact that we have literally thousands of position descriptions that they can draw from, that we have literally millions of applicants that come in every year who make certs, who are ready to be hired, and they don't have to do a lot of onerous steps in order to bring them on board. With all of those things written down in the policy memo, we're doing the follow-up to make sure they have the training, they have the tools, they have the access, and it becomes common practice for them to be able to use all of this as opposed to the old and slower way.
What do you expect the hiring managers and what do you expect the HR managers to do at the agencies that maybe they haven't been doing or haven't been doing enough of, or maybe you want them to do something in a different way?
We all think anytime we hire that it's a special, unique experience, and it absolutely is. However, we hire thousands of IT professionals in government every year, thousands of procurement specialists. You should draw on the work that your colleagues do around government. Use their position descriptions, use the folks that they interview, but it wasn't quite the right fit for USDA or quite the right fit for Department of Transportation, but maybe they're perfect for you. They are already on a list that you can draw from and hire from immediately. In addition to that, we want them to be able to stay in constant communication with applicants. There's nothing worse than the feeling of I dropped my application in, I never heard anything. We have automated tools for that make it easier for us to stay in touch with applicants, be transparent with them about what's happening, and also make sure that all of the words that we use to describe roles, to describe position descriptions, and to talk through the hiring practice are in plain English and not in bureaucratese, which makes it incredibly distancing for the folks who want to serve their country.
How much of what agencies will have to do or should do to comply with this will be technology-based work that somebody in the HR office should be doing in conjunction with the CIO, and how much of it is just policy and governance within the HR shop at an agency?
So I think there's a few elements to this. One is making sure people feel like they have the permission to do it. So, and that's part of what the policy memo was, like you guys are able to do this right now. They have, through USA Jobs and some of the tools that OPM offers. A lot of these tools are already available, whether that be the agency talent portal or agency talent pools. We want to make sure that people have access to those. They have training on how to access and use them, and it becomes an instinct of, before I come up with this new hire initiative, I'm going to look here first. So there's a combination of, do you have access to the tools, but also is it second nature to you to go to these places first to understand what can I take advantage of that's already been done before me? With that scale of 200,000 hires in the federal government every year, how can I take advantage of that in a way that benefits my agency in addition to all the work that was already done? You
have a cadre of very skilled, very experienced, terrific professional HR people across government. The downside to that potentially is they have their ways of doing things. And what you're suggesting, it sounds like, is changing that. How do you advise them, either in this document or just from an advisory perspective, to change that culture, to get them to do things in a different way than they've done it before?
So first off, I want to make sure that they are taking advantage of the training, the convenings, and the partnership building that we're doing as part of the launch of this memo. We did not want to just post and pray. We wanted to implement and be implementing partners with all of the parts of this triangle here. The second is to, whenever you have an instinct of surely this could be done better, faster, more efficiently, or surely I can draw on somebody else's work, the answer to that is yes. And you should contact hx@opm.gov to ask what that is. And they are there, that hiring experience office is there to help. The third thing is, if you see a good model elsewhere, an amazing thing about government is we can copy and paste with no punishment. It's actually wonderful. So many people have done the work before that we can draw on and say, I'm going to try this now. And we have a growing ecosystem of hiring managers, lawyers, procurement specialists, and data scientists who are there to help along the way. Agency talent teams, which is one of the best innovations the last few years, they are there to be your friend and your guide on some of these new tools, because some of it takes a while to learn, some of it takes a while to get the instinct to do so. But once you do it, hiring becomes not a burden, it becomes an opportunity, it becomes faster, it becomes an incredible way to expand public service.
In addition to your terrific alliteration skills like post and pray, you also used the term memos and demos before we went on the air, so you're good at rhyming too. How does that pertain, that memos and demos phrase, apply to what you're doing here?
So I stole that from Administrator Robin Carnahan. So I think this is a both and piece, again, where you have to be able to show people that this is policy expectation and get it into the instruction manuals and the training they're going to do. In addition to that, you have to show people this is what good looks like when you implement these policies. When you implement skills-based hiring, when you use agency talent pools, when you apply data and analytics in order to support your hiring needs into the future. When you have models that you can, again, copy and paste from, it becomes so much easier to bring that into your existing practice. Our hiring professionals across government are incredibly talented. They're also incredibly overburdened. We have the biggest workforce in the country, and we make 200,000 hires a year. All of this is meant to make their jobs not only easier, but more gratifying, give them more space to be able to do the work that they need to be able to do, and hopefully allow us to step back and be more strategic as we bring talent into government.
What's the measurement framework that you and your colleagues are applying to this to see if agencies are getting on track and staying on track with the intent that you have here?
So I think there's a number of things that we issued with the memo, and the upfront thing I want to say is every quarter we're bringing agency statistics in this space to what we call the President's Management Council, the Council of Deputies run by the Deputy Director for Management at OMB, to say, how are we doing? And not just the reactions, because we do surveys around hiring experience, around applicant experience, and the hiring managers. Are they appreciating this? But also, when we say, go out and use these tools, how often are we using them? Are they having the impact on time to hire that we thought they would? Are the people that are being hired into the system through these novel ways of hiring, are they staying in government over the long term, or are they staying for a short period of time? So it's not just a short-term look at, are we moving the needle immediately, but a longer-term look at, are we actually, are the tools that we're creating here actually having the impact we expect them to have in a quarter, in 6 months, in a year, and down the road? And we want to partner with agencies to make sure that, one, we're measuring the right things, and two, when we actually do that work, is it actually getting them the outcomes that they would like?
Loren, it's great to have you on the program again. Thanks for joining me.
Love being here. Good to see you.
You can find links to all the resources that Loren talked about on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the identity issue, making cyber life easier for your team. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
Civilian federal service follows countless paths, each road unique. each journey distinct. WEPA has covered them all since 1943, from the demands of the job and accomplishments at work, to the joys of the family and milestones at home. From inside the office to beyond the Beltway, Group Term Life Insurance from WEPA has the coverage and benefits to protect you and your loved ones wherever Fed life leads. WEPA, for Feds, by Feds.
Welcome back. The Defense Department will release new guidance soon on how its component departments and agencies should evaluate zero trust solutions for responsible use. The Pentagon's Zero Trust strategy revolves around a framework of 152 activities. Rob San Martin is Area Vice President for Federal at Akamai Technologies. Rob, welcome. It's great to see you again. Identity management is one of the key components that people are working on Zero Trust. What's your sense of what agencies are doing well and what they may be having a hard time with regarding identity management, especially as it pertains to ZT?
You know, it's a tough landscape out there for the government to have to deal with, because you as a person, your identity is always the same, but where you are or what you're doing and the permissions needed is ever changing. So being able to do that at scale and in an efficient manner, whether it's on the battlefield or it's in the office or it's somewhere outside that somebody in the div needs to get involved to get there, that becomes a challenge on that zero trust front and the identity of the people.
What are you seeing agencies trying to do or asking you for or working together on, whether it's DoD or civilian, to try to address that challenge?
Currently, we're spending the majority of our time in DoD on the ICAM side of the equation, right? The front door into zero trust. So being able to identify that person and have the appropriate permissions in the environment. Are they connected? Are they disconnected? Did things change from when they were connected the last time? And Akamai excels in that area with a distribution of its infrastructure so that we can accommodate the military regardless of where they are.
What makes it easier and what makes it harder for agencies to get the identity piece correct? The DoD, of course, has had CACs for a number of years now, decades, and so on. Is it maybe cultural to think, well, maybe that's not the right solution for identity management anymore, or we have a lot of money sunk into that, so maybe that's something that we should try to keep going, or are there any mindset issues in your view here?
I think you're right on all of those fronts, right? We've already doing it, we're doing something, it might or might not be working. How hard is it? And then the dynamic of what they're doing, I think, is far more complex now than what it was. So, you know, the technology and the vendors, for us to be able to adapt and accommodate what they need to do, you know, because it's the least permissive situation that they're getting into, and how can we solidify that so that they have confidence that you are where you are and what you're supposed to be looking at or doing.
Just about every leader that I talk to in the department, including Mr. Garciga, who will be on the show in just a few moments, talks about the added layers of complexity that edge computing present to the environments that they're building. What does that concept of computing at the edge, and therefore identity management at the edge, mean for people that are trying to solve these problems?
Yeah, that edge compute or edge awareness is a keystone for Akamai. So being able to process with the accurate information and or make the communications and the appropriate decisions. So are you in sync? Are you communicating at the right time? And do you have that? I think is an advantage, but it's a challenge because the edge is ever evolving and ever moving. Our edge is not the same as somebody else's edge. So where is the edge? That's the biggest discussion in the conversation, that everybody has differing opinions. It's got to be solved.
Well, and I think you're on target there too, because what your edge is today might not be your edge tomorrow either. And I imagine, so it's like a three-dimensional layer of complexity there. Is that a fair read on my part?
It is fair, and it also depends where we are geographically, right? We can get closer in some circumstances, and then there's absolutely the situations where the military, where they can't get to the backbones and the edge, and how can we accommodate or try to help them so they can, if you will, communicate in clear sight without anybody knowing what's going on there. That's a whole nother challenge, and the edge actually then becomes the forward deployment, where we have to originate and then, you know, get communications from.
All right, we have about a minute left, Rob. You mentioned the front door. I love that analogy, comparing ICAM to the front door. what's right behind the front door for a zero trust professional? If they get to a point where they think, okay, I'm pretty confident that we have that piece of it okay, what's the next thing to pay attention to in your view?
I think that that evolving market for API security and then segmentation, right? So you're getting two other layers in the Swiss cheese right away. Is this something that is supposed to be coming in or communicating? And then on the segmentation side, are they something that has been here before, we recognize it, or do we need to stop and take a quick check to figure out is this something that we really want or not?
Rob, it's great to have you on the program again. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more about identity management and zero trust in the federal government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, Gen AI gets a boost in the Army. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment.
Recruiting of the workforce, it's such a diverse group. It's a much more diverse group. It was easier. The message could be far simpler, 30, 40 years ago. But now when you look at the workforce and the wide range of people that can serve in those 100,000 jobs that are needed, you need the 25-year-olds, you need the wisdom of the retired veterans that are coming back to support. But then you also want folks that really can go in for the long haul and really see and have grown up in that culture and really can bring and really embrace that culture. So you need all kinds of that variety of people, and the recruiting strategy is tough because it can't be a one-size-fits-all. It really has to be pretty diverse.
Welcome back. 400 users across the Army will explore generative artificial intelligence capabilities in the cloud. It's part of a service-wide effort to analyze use cases for the technology. Leonel Garciga is Chief Information Officer of the Army. Leo, welcome. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining me. What do you want to learn from what these 400 users, or maybe more over time, will experiment with through AI?
Francis, great question. So we're really excited right now with some of the work we're doing in this space. It's really been about kind of the first test of the technology. How do we bring it against a bunch of different use cases and a bunch of users to understand where it makes sense for us to leverage large language models and generative AI. So we're really excited about the approach here. Very disciplined, very deliberate. I think if you take a step back, the idea here is to try everything from as-a-service use cases where we can have some folks that may be novices getting on and using the capabilities. A lot of it from small businesses, some of it from some of our larger integrators, just bringing it in and giving some test cases, to much larger, much more difficult pieces. Think large programs, right, or large data sets across the Army with maybe some PhD type folks working against these models. So we're trying to take that broad swath to accomplish a couple of things. First thing, which I think is the most important stuff, is what's the business model, right? How are we going to deliver this as a service to the Army, right? Army's a large beast, right? It's huge. We do everything from logistics, right, to medical, to warfighting operations. How do we get across that entire swath of functional areas and really peel back like where it makes sense to do, to leverage large language models, right, and where we have the skill set to really operationalize it. So the first piece is that business case piece, right? What are the use cases? Where can we get some lessons learned? Where are we objectively given lift, right, or reducing cognitive burden to our users? And where does it make sense to kind of grow that space? The next piece is a piece that is kind of interesting, and it's the business part of this, which really is, how do we cost this, right? So a bunch of different models, bunch of different delivery mechanisms. How do we start thinking about how we resource this work in this space? What we're seeing kind of already is in an unconstrained environment, folks are using these technologies and they're kind of running out of the money piece, right? So how do we get to a more predictable model where we can really get, hey, you've got this use case, it's going to be about this much, and start folks down the path to use the technology. So those are two big rocks that we're doing. The next one is kind of thinking through the data set piece, right? I think right now we're definitely technically unconstrained, right? Folks kind of working in pockets. So we've brought that in and said, hey, there's opportunities here to share data sets across multiple functional areas. We don't kind of want to repeat the work, right? There's resource around that. You get some drift. So real big focus on learning where it makes sense to do centralized or decentralized work in the space, centralized or decentralized data, and get kind of folks hands on keyboard. long term, the intent, right? These proofs of concept really are shape the way we're going to resource some of the technology, shape the way it's going to be delivered, and then lastly, gives us a good place to start from a requirements perspective to start thinking about acquisitions we as the Army want to do in this space. So we're really excited to have about 400 folks on there from across the Army with different levels of sophistication, working a bunch of different problems, everything from folks on the legal staff working, how do we look at law across the board and make it a lot easier for us to make some decisions on, let's say, the next Army regulation comes out, to much broader, much more difficult challenges. How do we look at soldier health across soldier records? So it's pretty broad right now, but the intent is still the same, right? Do some micro proofs of concepts, understand what the space looks like, figure out how we want to deliver this, and figure out how we want to resource it. So we're pretty pumped with where we are today.
Do you think that you have the same chicken or egg issue as far as use cases that other organizations across government do, which is, do we think about what use cases we could apply artificial intelligence to first, or do we think about what artificial intelligence can do and then go about identifying what the possible use cases are, or maybe it's some combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I think we're seeing customers come from both sides of the problem, depending on what they're trying to solve. More often than not, right now what we're seeing is we think that this technology will help us. What do you think? So we're doing a lot of work up front, kind of triaging the use cases and saying, hey, maybe this is not a good use case for large language models, or sometimes it's like, we don't have that model available yet. When we make that available, that's a good use case for this model. So there's still some work. A little bit chicken and egg, but I do believe there's enough momentum right now in the Army. I would say that our front door has a backlog because there's so many use cases coming in. It's taken some time to kind of triage through that.
I mentioned 400. You mentioned that number as well. At what point do you go, okay, this is working pretty well, and so we would like to open it up to more people potentially to try it? How much of that, and how much of that's a bandwidth issue, and how much of it is just a governance issue? We want to make sure that we're doing this part of it right before we expand it.
It's a governance issue. I think great conversation actually yesterday between our team and the acquisition team specifically on this, on how do we expand, and what we found very quickly is there's some areas that we really need to think through the governance piece. We don't want unbridled sprawl in this space, right? That's a challenge in and of itself, and creating more and unique and boutique models all over the Army will probably not benefit the Army. So we really want to work on getting the model right for how we deliver the technology and how we govern it, and then start scaling it out. There are some good efforts, though, where we're already talking about opening the aperture a little more, where they're very small teams who are working very niche kind of challenges that they have, and they've got a good plan and the right skill set. We're going to open it up to those folks because they're ready to go, right? I think for the broader use cases, we have some work to do and figure out what the governance model is.
Another area where I imagine you're working with your acquisition team is on your new policy on agile software development. What does that look like, and how are you measuring the progress of that, Leo?
Oh, I am super excited about this. So we are having a lot of fun in this space. So we are on the cusp. I think about 90 days ago, I made a commitment and said, hey, we're going to be at continuous ATO. We're in a good place right now. We're about 2 weeks out from kind of issuing some policy in this space. That really gets to this foundation of being able to do Agile and DevSecOps, and really across 3 separate areas. One is on identification of, these are the platforms where we expect folks to run fast in, right? And what I mean by that is whether they're no-code, low-code, or they're actual full platforms that are accredited, build software, right? Move at speed and scale on those. So we're going to put some guidance out on that, which will be very helpful. We've done that already for analytic platforms. This is going to be a little bit broader to open the aperture up and get folks moving. The next piece is this idea of assessing maturity. So we've talked about, hey, these folks are doing Agile, they're using the DevSecOps pipeline. We've taken a little bit of a different approach here in the Army versus a checklist-based approach. What we're saying is we understand that not everyone and not every program is at the same maturity level, but we do believe that we should say you can use these platforms and you can do this part of continuous integration, continuous delivery. You may not get to the prize, which is a continuous ATO, but we're going to help walk the dog there, right? And get everybody kind of in a safe space to make that happen. The big thing around this is going to be that maturity piece, right? We've got 2 programs that we're excited about who've kind of jumped on first and say, hey, we got this. We think they're at a good place. We've got about 7 more teed up who've already come to the table and said, we'd like you to assess our maturity in this space. So I think we're in a really good spot to have the foundation to make this happen at scale across the Army.
We just have a couple of minutes left, both about the Agile software development piece piece and the artificial intelligence piece that we talked about earlier, what's your collaboration and cooperation look like with the other service CIOs, with Venus Goodwine at the Air Force, with Jane Rathbun in the Navy, to share best practices? This worked, this didn't work, you should try this, you can avoid this, that kind of thing.
So we're actually in a really good spot. We have been very diligent on making sure that we're sharing across the services. One of the things I can say over the last year that's been really interesting, we've been kind of on a tear, issuing a lot of new policy on emerging technology. A lot of good work on sharing that with the Air Force and the Navy and getting their input early on before we even publish, and vice versa. There's some stuff that every service has done that we've benefited from, so we've been able to take some of that, and I don't want to quite say copy paste, but copy paste. So it's been really good having both Ben and Jane on there, because I think we've been able to work together, and we've known each other for a while, so it's been an easy relationship. And again, common goals, right? So everyone's kind of moving in the same direction right now, which is a good thing to see in the department.
It oils things too when you're doing these things in a joint way, right?
Right, reciprocity, right? Like, we've got it working in the Department of Defense. I know folks are getting used to it, but across all the services, we're seeing it happen in a real way, so it's a big deal.
Leo, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for your time today.
All right, fantastic. Appreciate you inviting me on.
You can read more about everything Leo and I talked about on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. If you missed the FedGov Today podcast this week, you can listen on demand anytime. The newest episode features 3 AI leaders from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency on the agency's AI efforts now and what's coming in the future. You can find the FedGov Today podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and anywhere else you listen to shows, and always on demand at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today TV is back in a moment. The new TV show, Better Contracting, Better Outcomes, is available on demand now at fedgovtoday.com. You'll learn from top executives at NASA, DoD, Social Security, and more, plus industry experts that are leading government-industry partnerships. Discover their strategies for improving acquisition efficiency, achieving mission success, and driving innovation through federal contracting. Better Contracting, Better Outcomes, presented by the National Contract Management Association. Watch anytime at fedgovtoday.com. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, FedGov Today is headed to the Association of the U.S. Army's annual meeting, October 14th through 16th at the Washington Convention Center. The theme is Transforming for a Complex World. Top leaders from the Army and DoD will be there, like Leonel Garciga, who you just saw, along with more than 700 exhibits and representatives of armies from around the world. You can read more about it and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30. New FITARA grades are coming this week. One of the most successful FITARA-era CIOs will be here. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.